Everybody, welcome to Aquarian Pearls, and today we're visiting Broome in Western Australia with a dear friend of my father, Mr. William Reid, Bill Reid. Welcome to our Aquarian Pearls interview.
Thanks, David. Okay.
We're so happy to be all together. Bill's been in the business way longer than I've been alive, and is the unofficial mayor of Broome. You invited me to come to Broome in 1985 when I was 22 to judge the Shinju Matsuri Pearl viewing competition, and that ended up completely changing my life because, of course, I kept coming back to Broome and worked for the Calises for a time and then for the Pass Baileys, and you totally got me into the Australian South Sea Pearl business. So I'm ever grateful for you, Bill. And can I start off asking you where you grew up and what you learned and what you studied and how you got into the pearl business?
David, well, I first met you when you were 6 days old because I visited your mother in hospital, and I got to
fantastic.
Say, where did I? And I don't think you've completely grown up yet, but you were a rascal of a child. You were a terribly difficult child, David. Where did I grow up? I grew up in Queensland, from a fishing family, but I didn't want to be a fisherman, so I studied Fisheries Biology. I took a job with the Papua New Guinea administration based in Port Moresby. One of my first jobs was to do a survey of the pearl oysters and trochus shells in the Trobriand Islands down in the far south, the east part of Papua New Guinea. And that took a couple of years, but then I got malaria fever very badly and was told to go to a dry climate. I wrote to one of the UN agencies, FAO, and asked if they have a job in a dry climate. They said, we've got a job where we can't find anybody stupid enough to go there because it hasn't rained for 3 years. And so off I went to the Red Sea part of the Sudan. And I followed the work of Dr. Cyril Crossland, who did some pioneering work on the collection of the post-larval stages of pearl oysters and rearing them through to adult. And I occasionally found a few natural pearls, which I recall showing to your father many, many years ago, to Boris Norman, who was a great influence on my life. Because Boris was even best man or witness at my wedding, although he got lost getting there and was half an hour late.
Sounds like Boris.
But Boris introduced me then to, after the Sudan, he introduced me to Jacques Rosenthal, who arranged from the Rosenthal brothers pearl farm, or pearl dealers of several generations. And Jacques arranged for me to go to Tahiti to survey the black-lip pearl oysters, which he'd seen when he was there on holiday, to the black-lip pearl oysters in one of the many atolls of Papua New Guinea. And together with several Tahitian businessmen, he financed an experimental pearl farm at Manihi atoll. And I went there for a month or so. The oysters, the pearl oysters, were various ages and sizes and quality. I suggested to the French government, or the French Tahitian government, that it might be worth trying to collect the spat as I had done in the Red Sea. We could have uniform sized pearl oysters, which makes it much simpler to seed them because you can use beads of the same size. And it was much simpler to inseminate these, like I had done in Dongonab Bay in the Sudanese Red Sea. Okay. After 5 years working for the French Tahitian authorities, I finished my contract, and together with several French and Chinese businessmen, we set up a pearl farm in the Dongonab Archipelago, very, very remote. down near Pitcairn Island, about 1,000 miles southeast of Tahiti.
So you'd only get there by boat or by plane?
And no, I was fortunate that at that time, the French were doing atmospheric tests of the atom bomb at Muraroa Atoll, very nearby. And so there was a plane every week. They built an airstrip on one of the atolls there, and there was a plane every week. And this was starting to go quite well when the French decided to make their atomic test underground. Okay, they no longer needed a plane to go down there because they had the atoll, the airstrip at Muraroa. So no planes. There used to be one plane a week. Instead of one plane a week, there was going to be a cargo boat every 6 months.
Whoa.
Fairly newly married, had a young child. My God, with a cargo boat every 6 months. It would have been a disaster. So I had to, but at that time, I was totally fortunate that a Chinese Tahitian businessman, Robert Wan, came to Gambier, and he decided to buy the company that I largely owned. And so Robert Wan he started to put a lot of money into it. He had his own plane, so he could fly from Papua down to Muraroa, down to the Gambier, to Rikatia. And Robert was very enterprising fellow, spent a lot of money together with the Japanese technicians and so forth. And within 3 or 4 years, he was the biggest pearl farmer in the world. He produced up to 5 tons, 5,000 kilos of pearl annually, of black Tahitian pearls, blackish. They shouldn't be called black pearls because they're not really black. They're all sorts of beautiful peacock colors. And the very finest Tahitian peacock colored pearls are really, in my opinion, after 40 years in the business or more, they're the finest pearls in the world. And Gombe was an ideal place to grow these Tahitian pearls. So Robert, okay, with my young family, I returned to my homeland in Australia. And there I was offered a position to examine the reasons for the high mortality of pearl oysters in the last.
Bill, was that in the 1970s?
In 1975, exactly.
Yes.
And so my job was to see if we could lessen the amount of mortality amongst these pearl oysters. Together with some other people from one of the universities in Perth, we managed to get most of the way there. And this pearl farm was in a remote inlet that was even unnamed, about 300 miles north of Broome, which they later called Kuri Bay after Mr. Kuribayashi in Japan. And the nearest town was Broome, so access to Kuri Bay was only by boat. And so if you had a toothache, you might have to wait for the next boat for a month or more to take it back to the dentist in.
That is such remote living, isn't it? We can't imagine it in today's world. Wow.
In today's world, you can't imagine. There was only radio contact with the boat, and the divers, those days we fished only the wild oysters, the wild pearl oysters off the 80-mile beach. And the divers were a rough, tough band of former abalone divers from the East Coast. And I chose the best of them, John Fox Lowe, and talked to him about setting up our own pearl farm. Stuff the bosses, we'll have our own pearl farm. I knew a little bit about pearl farming, but not as much as I would have liked. But where would we get the finance to start this pearl farm? Okay, after meeting with quite a few different people. We met up with Michael Kalis, who was a prawn fisherman and a crayfish fisherman, and a very enterprising guy. So yeah, Michael offered to finance the project for us in exchange for a large part of the shares in the company. Okay, things were going fairly well when looking for a new site for pearl farm. I fell and broke my leg. My God, what will I do now? I was feeling very depressed. And my business partner, John Lowe, said, wow, that's fantastic. We will wheel you down to the shed and you can sell pearls from this old shed in Broome. Prior to that, the totality of Australian pearls were exported to Japan, to Nippo Pearls, which was Kurabashi in Japan. But all we had to advertise was a blackboard sale out on the side of the street, pearls for sale.
Were there any other retail stores open in those days?
Absolutely not. The last retail store open had been TBL's 50 years ago, selling natural pearls.
Wow.
Anyway, I recovered my broken leg and was about wanting to go back into the work on the pearl farm. But my partner suggested that we find an enterprising jeweler and start a pearl jewelry store. It was pretty primitive in those days. And but it thrived, and today there's at least 10 stores in the town of Broome selling Australian pearls. And our retail prices were several times what our export prices have been. And it gave us an income 12 months of the year instead of once a year.
Yes.
A massive pearl crop. And still, Australia, about half of Australian pearls are exported to countries throughout the world. They are really renowned as the finest pearls in the world, and also the most expensive. How do you tell a good pearl? Okay, there's no such thing, as you know, David, that a big, round, lustrous, flawless, cheap pearl. Our pearls are, I'd say, not expensive by its world standards, but they're quite costly. And Australia is now about 50% of our pearls are exported throughout the world. 50% sold throughout Australia.
Bill, what's the most expensive pearl necklace you sold?
It hasn't happened yet. I'm looking for a bigger one, a bigger flawless pearl. But our pearls start at about 10 millimeters in diameter and go up to 20, 22 millimeters. But a pearl like that would retail at what, $100,000 for a 22 millimeter perfect. But there's only 8 or 10 of those in the world. Perhaps not 8 or 10, 3 or 4.
And you've sold some amazing pearl necklaces over the years. I mean, lots of them, but especially super ones in the early days too.
Oh yes. I'm very proud to be able to sell to Lord McAlpine when he really put Broome on the map.
Yes.
It is a wonderful place, Broome. It has the finest beaches in the world. It has doesn't get very, very hot. It's a wonderful place. It's now developed into a big tourist town. But
Bill, how long have you been in Broome?
I came in 75. What does that make it? 25.
45 years.
45 years. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And it's home for me. I'll leave my bones in Broome not too soon, I hope.
Far away.
Yeah. You asked what would I?
Oh, and Bill, who are the unique characters that along the way that you most admire in the pearl business?
Mostly the indigenous people. There were some wonderful indigenous divers.
Yes.
Young Neville Polina is the best. Neville came to me, started work for me on the day he was 14 years of age, and he became the best diver in Broome. I recall he's quite black, and I recall taking him for a dive in Dongonab Bay, And he came fluttering up to the top, saying, no, I don't want to be a diver. And my pal John Lowe took him down to the bottom, and he didn't come up for half an hour, and never became a very, very, very good diver and a memorable young fellow.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Bill, and can I ask you too how you see the business developing too in the future from what you've seen in the past?
David, the future I think still looks very bright. There are pearl farms, South Sea pearl farms in other parts of the world, particularly in Indonesia and Burma, but they don't produce pearls as good as those from Broome. Why? Why? Because the ocean temperature here has a very big annual variation from about just over 20 degrees in the winter through to 33 in the summer. And when the temperature is very low, the animals have spawn. It's much easier to seed them, and they don't grow very fast for a start during the winter. But then when the ocean temperature becomes 25 or more, they start growing like the clappers. So it does produce the biggest pearls. But they've got the finest coating of pearl matter around the nucleus. Whereas in Torres Straits, Indonesia and elsewhere, the water temperature is almost the same throughout the year. So you get a lot more spots on the pearl, and they're not as lustrous as the Australian pearls. So I think our Australian pearl industry, it's been going very well for many years and still going well, David. And I don't think there's any woman so beautiful that a pearl cannot enhance her beauty.
I so agree with you, Bill. I'm with you all the way on that. And Bill, where can everybody find you if they come to Broome?
I'm fairly well known in Broome.
Just ask for you.
If you want to send me a letter, just put Bill Reid, Broome, and it finds its way to me.
You're the unofficial mayor, but you're in Allure South Sea Pearls. If people want to come in on Dampier Terrace.
Yeah, on Dampier Terrace, opposite the pub, opposite the Roebuck pub, the hotel. Yeah, Allure South Sea Pearls. And I've got a wonderful staff. Been running a business like this. It's important to have very, very good staff with a good knowledge of what they're selling. And a lot of people in the city don't know much about pearls except the price on the ticket. Whereas,
so great.
Yeah, our staff can explain to people about how to grow a pearl and how to sell a good pearl. And we have made a lot of improvements in producing fine quality pearls in the last few years, particularly now instead of fishing the wild oysters down on the 80 Mile beach, we hatch a lot of the oysters in laboratories, pick the very finest females, the very finest males, put them together in hatcheries and produce pearls of a white-pink color. In earlier times, not more than about 20% of our product would be top grade. And that's gone from 20% to 40 or 50% of our pearls. And our top grade, flawless white pink pearls. They are really and truly the finest in the world.
Bill, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a great honor to have you. And can I ask you if you have any final messages for people watching this who'll all be in the future, all the young people like my nephew Charlie, who's 25 and new in the business?
What advice could I give them? Work understudy from David Norman for a while, because David knows a lot about pearls after, nearly how many years in the business now, David?
Gosh, I started in Japan at 18, so that makes me 57. 40 years next year, 39 years so far.
Yeah, you certainly know quite a lot about pearls now, David. And it's been great to be associated with it from the age of 6 days and to still be associated with you. All the best, David.
Thank you so much, Bill. All my love to you.
Thanks, David. All the best. So long now. Bye. Bye, David.